dark alleyways, faint sirens in the distance. Then a sudden, gut-wrenching yelp pierces the night. A retired K9, once a fearless protector, now left battered and bleeding on the cold pavement. The gang thought they had silenced him forever, but they had no idea who was coming. This wasn't just an attack, it was a declaration of war. Because this K9 had a partner, a man who had fought beside him, trusted him with his life. And now, that man was coming for revenge. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. A retired dog, an unstoppable force, and a hunt that would shake an entire city. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Stay with me, because this story, it will leave you speechless. The city slept, but in the shadows, danger lurked. It started like any other night, quiet, still, a deceptive peace hanging in the air. But for one retired K9, this would be a night of unimaginable pain. Rex, a former police K9, had spent years on the force, tracking criminals, taking down threats, and saving lives. He was a hero, but heroes don't get happy endings. Retired, aging, and without the badge, he was just another dog to most people. But to one gang, he was something more, a target. The alley was dark, the street lights flickering. Footsteps echoed. Low voices whispered. Then, a sudden metallic click. A beer bottle shattered against the pavement. Laughter followed, cruel and mocking. Rex wasn't a threat to them. He wasn't chasing them anymore. He was just walking, minding his own business, unaware that his past had come back to haunt him. The gang had a grudge. Some of them had been locked away because of him, and now out on the streets again, they wanted revenge. But who takes revenge on a dog? The first strike came from behind, a steel-toed boot slamming into Rex's ribs. A yelp of pain. He staggered, his old instincts kicking in, but his body wasn't what it used to be. He turned to face his attackers, 4 men, grinning, ready to destroy the animal that had once put their crew behind bars. Another hit. This time, a pipe struck his side. Rex collapsed, panting, his vision blurring. Blood trickled onto the pavement. Not so tough without a badge, huh? One of them sneered. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken him. But Rex wasn't done. He struggled to stand, his legs wobbling. He locked eyes with the leader, the same man he had once tackled to the ground during a drug bust. The memory burned in his mind. But now there was no uniform, no backup, no sirens in the distance. Just him. And thumb. A final kick sent him crashing down. The gang laughed, thinking it was over. But what they didn't realize, someone was coming. Someone who would stop at nothing. Because this wasn't just a dog. This was a warrior. And warriors never fall alone. Rex's body lay motionless on the cold pavement, his ribs bruised and his heart racing. The gang, thinking their job was done, dispersed into the night, leaving the once proud K9 battered, broken, and abandoned in the darkness. But Rex wasn't finished. Not yet. As the pain surged through him, he tried to summon the strength he once had. He was a warrior. The thought echoed in his mind like a command. A deep breath, shaky and painful, filled his lungs. His vision blurred, but he refused to close his eyes. He couldn't. This wasn't the end. Rex's training had prepared him for many things, life-or-death moments, violent confrontations, and near-death situations. But nothing could have prepared him for this kind of agony. His mind screamed at him to get up, to move, but every fiber of his being was telling him to stay down. His body was failing him. He could feel his strength slipping away, the world growing quieter with each passing second. Yet, something deep inside refused to let go. A promise, a bond, a partner. A low whimper escaped from Rex's throat, but he forced himself to push through it. The sounds of the city, the faint hum of passing cars, the faraway sirens, the distant clamor of life, seemed to grow more and more distant, as if the world were slipping away from him. But Rex couldn't surrender. He knew what it meant to protect, to fight, to survive. He had once been the one to protect his handler, his partner, no matter the odds. Now, it was his turn to fight for his own survival. He let out a strained growl, a deep rumble from within that carried the weight of all the battles he had fought. Rex dragged himself to his feet, his legs trembling under his weight. He had been through worse before. The gang had underestimated him, underestimated his will to survive. Pain exploded in his chest as he stumbled forward, but the anger fueling him pushed him to keep going. The familiar sounds of the city around him blurred as he focused on one thing: getting out of this alley. He limped down the dark street, using every ounce of his remaining strength to stay upright. Blood dripped from his side, leaving a trail on the pavement behind him, but he didn't care. He had one goal now: to survive, to return home, to fight back. Minutes turned to hours as Rex dragged his wounded body through the night. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, but the primal instinct to stay alive pushed him forward. There were times when he wanted to collapse, to let the darkness take him, but he didn't. Not yet. Not while there was still a chance. He reached the familiar street where his handler's house stood, the comforting lights shining from the windows. The smell of fresh coffee and the warmth of home reached his senses, stirring something deep inside him. This was it. He was close. But as Rex stumbled forward, his legs buckled beneath him. His body collapsed to the ground with a thud. His mind screamed in agony, but his body refused to cooperate. He was so close but so far away. He lay there, breathing heavily, fighting to stay conscious. He couldn't give up. He couldn't. He had to find a way to tell his partner what happened. He had to warn him. With a final, desperate effort, Rex lifted his head and dragged his body one last time, using every ounce of strength to crawl forward. His legs were raw from scraping against the rough asphalt, and his side burned with each movement. But he kept going, inch by inch, closer and closer to the door that would lead him to safety. Then, finally, with a low whine, Rex collapsed on the porch of his handler's house. His body trembled, his eyes fluttering with exhaustion. But he had made it. He had survived. The door swung open, and his handler, Michael, rushed out, kneeling beside his fallen companion. His eyes widened with shock as he saw the blood, the bruises, the damage that had been inflicted on his beloved K9. He knew Rex had been through hell, but this was something else. "Rex," Michael whispered, his voice breaking. "You made it, buddy. You made it back." Rex's tail gave a faint, weak wag, the last sign of life left in his tired body. Michael's heart ached as he gently lifted the K9 into his arms, cradling him like a wounded child. "Hang on, Rex. We're going to get you help. I'm not losing you. Not after everything we've been through." But Rex's journey wasn't over yet. It wasn't just about surviving the night anymore. It was about avenging what had happened to him. Michael had already made up his mind. The gang that hurt his partner would pay. He gently whispered to Rex, "You're not alone. We're in this together. I'll make sure they never hurt you again." And with that promise, the hunt for revenge began. Michael paced around the living room, his mind a whirlpool of thoughts, each more determined and filled with rage than the last. His hands clenched into fists, his knuckles turning white with tension. The bloodied and bruised K9, Rex, rested by his side, weak but alive, breathing steadily after being patched up. The sight of his partner in pain, broken from the gang's attack, stoked a fire in Michael that could not be extinguished. "They're going to pay," he muttered under his breath. His jaw tightened as he glanced at Rex, who looked up at him with the same unwavering loyalty that had been their bond since the day they first met. Rex's eyes were heavy, tired, but there was a quiet strength in them. He understood what Michael was saying. He understood that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for justice. The thought of those men, the gang members, leaving his partner for dead in an alley haunted Michael's every waking moment. They thought they could just harm his K9, hurt his family, and walk away unscathed. Not on his watch. Not while he was still breathing. Without a word, Michael grabbed his jacket and slipped on his boots. The night was dark, the street lights casting long shadows on the sidewalk, but he didn't care. His mind was fixed. The only thing he saw was the image of those thugs, the ones who dared to hurt Rex. Michael had always been one to protect his own, whether it was in the line of duty or in life. But now, this wasn't just about duty. This was personal. This was war. Rex let out a low whine as Michael opened the door, pausing for just a moment as if asking if Michael was really going through with it. The pain in Rex's eyes was clear, but there was something else there too, trust. A trust that went beyond words, beyond anything that could be spoken. Rex had been through hell, but so had Michael, and he knew that the bond they shared couldn't be broken. Not even by the cruel hands of those gang members. "Stay here, buddy," Michael said softly, glancing down at his injured partner. "You rest. I'll be back soon." Rex nodded as best he could, his head sinking back into the blanket Michael had placed around him. But Michael knew that Rex didn't need to hear the words to understand. The two of them had fought side by side for years. Rex knew what Michael was about to do, and that he wouldn't stop until the gang had paid for what they did. Michael grabbed his keys and walked outside. The cool night air slapped his face, but it did little to cool the burning anger inside him. He got into his truck and started the engine. As the wheels rolled over the cracked asphalt, Michael's mind raced. His police training kicked in. He knew the area the gang operated in, had worked countless cases related to their crimes. They weren't just a bunch of low-level thugs. They were organized, dangerous, and resourceful. They had connections, places to hide, and more importantly, they were good at covering their tracks. But they weren't better than him. Michael wasn't just any cop. He was someone who understood the streets. He had spent years chasing down criminals, uncovering secrets hidden in the darkest corners of the city. He knew how to track, how to anticipate, how to make someone feel like they had nowhere left to run. And now it was personal. The engine of his truck roared as he drove through the city's winding roads. The sound of tires hitting the pavement became a rhythmic beat in his head, pushing him forward. Every turn, every alley he passed, brought him closer to the gang's turf. He parked a few blocks away from their usual hideout, a rundown warehouse at the edge of town, surrounded by industrial areas and forgotten factories. The place was unremarkable at first glance, but Michael knew better. This was the heart of their operation, and it was here where they felt untouchable. As Michael stepped out of his truck, the cold night air cut through his jacket, but he didn't feel it. He was too focused, too determined to let anything get in his way. His footsteps echoed in the empty street as he moved toward the warehouse, blending into the darkness like a shadow. Silent, calculating, dangerous. Inside, the gang members were celebrating their small victory, laughing at their successful attack on Rex, oblivious to the storm coming for them. Michael knew that this was the perfect time to strike. They wouldn't expect him, after all. They had no idea that someone was coming for revenge. They had no idea what kind of man they had pissed off. Michael moved swiftly, his years of training allowing him to slip through the shadows unnoticed. Every corner, every step he took was deliberate. His breathing slowed, his mind honed in on the task ahead. He had been in dangerous situations before, but now there was something deeper, a sense of retribution. He reached the entrance of the warehouse and paused for a moment. There was a heavy silence on the other side. The gang members were unaware, drunk in their triumph, thinking they were untouchable. Michael's eyes narrowed as he reached for the door handle. This was the moment. With a swift motion, he yanked the door open, stepping inside like a predator that had just found its prey. The gang members froze, their eyes widening in surprise as they recognized him. Michael's presence was a sudden, terrifying realization for them. They had thought they were safe, but now they were facing a man who had nothing left to lose. "You messed with the wrong K9. Michael's voice was low, deadly, his gaze locking onto the leader of the gang. Fear flickered in the thug's eyes, and for the first time, they realized just how badly They had underestimated the one they had hurt. This was no longer a chase for justice. It was a hunt, and Michael wasn't going to stop until he had exacted his revenge. And they were about to learn just how ruthless he could be. The gang members froze. The air felt heavier now, charged with an ominous energy that made their blood run cold. Michael stood at the entrance, his figure illuminated by a dim, flickering light. It was clear he had come for one thing and one thing only: revenge. The gang leader, a hulking man with tattoos that covered his arms like a map of his criminal past, stood up first. His hands slowly clenched into fists, but his eyes betrayed him. Michael could see the fear creeping into his expression, the sudden realization that they were no longer in control. The rest of the gang scrambled to their feet, their chairs scraping loudly against the concrete floor, creating a discordant sound that echoed throughout the warehouse. Michael didn't flinch. His stance remained calm, measured, his every muscle coiled like a spring, ready to strike. "You really thought you could get away with it?" Michael's voice was low and steady, but it carried the weight of a man whose patience had run out. One of the younger gang members, a jittery guy who couldn't have been more than 20, took a step forward, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "Man, it's just a dog. What's the big deal?" Michael's eyes locked onto him, and the silence between them felt suffocating. The gang member's smirk faltered as Michael's gaze intensified. "You think this is about a dog?" Michael's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "This is about loyalty, honor, and you hurt my partner." The leader of the gang, who had been silent until now, took a step forward, trying to regain control of the situation. He was larger than most, with a presence that had been built through years of intimidation. But even he could sense that tonight was different. The tension in the room was palpable. The odds had shifted. "What do you want, cop?" the leader sneered, trying to mask the anxiety creeping into his voice. "We didn't hurt your precious dog. We got no beef with you. Let's just call it a night." Michael's eyes narrowed, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. "It's too late for that." The gang members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what their leader's next move should be. But the damage had already been done, and they all knew it. Michael wasn't here to talk. He wasn't here for negotiations or half-hearted threats. He was here to make them regret the night they left Rex bleeding in the alley. Out of nowhere, a sound echoed from behind Michael. The low rumble of a vehicle engine, followed by the unmistakable clatter of paws hitting the ground. The gang members froze, their faces going pale as they realized what was happening. They had underestimated Michael, and worse, they had underestimated his partner, Rex. Michael didn't flinch. He didn't need to look back to know what was happening. The faint sound of Rex's breath was enough. He could feel the K9's presence, like an extension of himself, as if they were one. Rex was more than just a partner. He was family. And now, Michael had come to show these criminals exactly what that meant. Rex was no longer lying weakly on the couch back at Michael's home. No longer the injured K9 who had suffered at their hands. No, now he was a machine, silent, focused, and driven by the same relentless desire for retribution that fueled Michael's every action. The gang was about to feel the wrath of a creature they had no idea existed. Rex's sleek, powerful frame darted forward, his powerful paws striking the ground with precision. His muscles rippled under his fur as he bolted into the warehouse, his eyes gleaming with one purpose. The gang members who had dared to hurt him were about to experience his fury. The young member who had spoken earlier was the first to react. He panicked, turning and running for the exit. But it was too late. Rex was faster. With a burst of speed, he lunged, knocking the man off his feet, his powerful jaws closing around the gang member's arm. The man screamed in agony, but Rex wasn't done. He held the gang member down, his sharp teeth digging into the flesh of his arm, just enough to remind him of the pain he had inflicted. The others watched in horror, their faces filled with disbelief. They had never seen anything like this before. They had thought they were facing a simple revenge story, a cop coming to settle the score. They hadn't anticipated the fury of a K-9, trained for battle, and fueled by a personal vendetta. Michael walked forward, his eyes never leaving the leader of the gang. The rest of the group stood frozen, watching as Rex expertly subdued one of their own with ease. The gang leader's face drained of color, and for the first time, Michael could see the fear settle in. "This is just a taste of what's to come," Michael said coldly. "You've all underestimated what it means to hurt someone who's loyal, to hurt someone who fights with everything they've got." The leader swallowed hard, trying to salvage whatever he could of the situation. "It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. We didn't know who we were messing with. Let's talk this out." Michael stepped forward, his voice growing sharper with every word. "There's nothing to talk about. You hurt my partner. You tried to break us. But what you didn't understand was that we're not the ones who break." Rex, with a final, authoritative growl, released the gang member's arm and stepped back. The man scrambled to his feet, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. One of the other gang members, a taller figure with tattoos snaking up his neck, stepped forward hesitantly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Please, we'll leave. Just let us go. We didn't know. We'll disappear, I swear." Michael's eyes never left the leader. "You're already gone. There's nothing left for you here." Rex growled low, a warning that sent a chill down the spine of the remaining gang members. It was a final message. There was nowhere to run. The gang's worst nightmare had come true. They had messed with the wrong K-9, and now they were going to pay the price. The warehouse was alive with tension. The distant hum of the city echoed outside, but within these walls, there was nothing but silence and the heavy breaths of the gang members and their adversaries. The remaining criminals, now cornered, could only watch in disbelief as Michael and his K-9 partner, Rex, stood before them. They had no escape. They had made a fatal mistake in crossing paths with a retired officer and his loyal companion. The leader of the gang, now shaking, tried to regain some semblance of control, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to negotiate. "You don't want this, man. We're just trying to survive. You and your dog, He couldn't finish the sentence. He could see the fury in Michael's eyes, but it was Rex that stole his breath away. Rex, the once injured K-9, now a machine of pure focus and instinct, prowled the warehouse floor like a silent predator. His sleek body rippled with every movement, his eyes locked onto the gang members with a deadly precision. The air felt thick with anticipation. Rex had been through hell, but now he was the embodiment of revenge. "You should have thought about survival before you laid a finger on Rex," Michael said, his voice a controlled whisper. But it was clear this was no longer about negotiation. This was about making the gang understand that the line had been crossed. This was about delivering justice. The gang leader's eyes darted to his men. He could see the fear, the panic in their faces, the same fear that now gripped his own heart. He had been through countless dangerous situations, dealt with enemies far more ruthless than Michael, but this felt different. This was personal, and as much as he wanted to make a break for it, the reality was clear. Rex wasn't just a dog anymore. He was an unstoppable force of nature. The leader slowly backed away, his hands raised in a sign of surrender. "Look, man, it's over. We're done. Just let us go. You've got what you wanted. We didn't know it was going to be like this." Michael shook his head. "No, it's not over yet. You hurt Rex, and now you'll see what happens when you mess with a bond stronger than anything you've ever known." He signaled for Rex, who responded instantly, his ears perked, his eyes narrowing in on the leader. The K-9's growl rumbled low, a sound so terrifying that even the hardened criminals could feel the hairs on the back of their necks rise. The gang members scattered, fear paralyzing their limbs. But they were too slow. Rex was too fast. In a flash, the K-9 was on the first man, knocking him to the ground with a single strike. His powerful jaws clamped around the man's arm, and the gang members screamed in agony. There was no escaping the wrath of a K9 that had tasted betrayal. The other gang members scrambled for cover, trying to hide behind crates, but Rex's keen senses tracked every movement. The warehouse, once a place of refuge for the gang, now felt like a death trap. Every corner was an exit that led to nowhere, and with Michael standing like a sentinel at the entrance, there was only one way out, and that was through them. The leader tried to shout commands, but it was clear that his men were no longer listening. The sound of bones cracking echoed through the dimly lit space as Rex pursued another man. His teeth sank deep into the leg of the second gang member, and the cry that escaped the man's throat was pure terror. "You should have known better," Michael muttered under his breath, moving toward the last of the gang. His steps were slow and deliberate, as if he were savoring the moment. The last remaining man, a tall figure with a scar running across his cheek, tried to rush at Michael. But before he could even reach him, Rex had already darted forward, locking his jaws around the man's wrist. The thug yelped in pain, dropping his weapon, his face contorting with fear. "Please, please," the man begged, his voice cracking. "I didn't want any part of this. I don't want to die." Michael stepped forward, towering over the man. "It's too late for mercy." But just as he raised his hand, signaling Rex to release his hold, a faint noise, a faint but unmistakable sound, reached his ears. A faint metallic click. The leader had somehow managed to scramble to his feet, pulling out a hidden gun. The barrel of the firearm gleamed under the warehouse lights, and with a panicked, trembling hand, he aimed it at Michael's head. "You don't get to decide when this ends," the gang leader shouted, his voice breaking. "I won't let you take everything from me." His finger twitched on the trigger. In that split second, Michael's instincts kicked in. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the shot that rang out. The bullet whizzed by, missing him by inches. But Rex, with the speed and precision of a predator, launched himself at the gang leader. He didn't hesitate, didn't think twice. He was already in motion before the gunshot even echoed through the room. With a powerful leap, Rex knocked the leader off balance, sending him sprawling to the ground. The gun skittered across the floor, useless in the face of the K9's rage. The leader struggled beneath Rex, but the K9 was unrelenting. His paws pinned the man to the ground as he growled low, a sound that vibrated through the concrete beneath them. Rex was in control now, and there was no mercy. Michael stood up, his expression cold and unforgiving. "You should have known who you were dealing with. This is the price of betrayal." The gang members, now scattered and terrified, realized they had lost. They were at the mercy of a man and his K9, a bond stronger than anything they could comprehend. Michael turned to the last man still standing, the one who had dared to aim the gun at him. "I told you it was too late for mercy," Michael said. "You picked the wrong fight." The gang's worst nightmare had just come true. The silence that followed the chaos was deafening. The warehouse, once filled with the sound of screams, heavy footsteps, and desperate calls for mercy, now stood eerily still. The echoes of Rex's powerful movements and the frantic cries of the gang had faded into the background. What remained were broken bodies, trembling men, and the quiet, unyielding presence of Michael and his loyal K9. Michael stood motionless, scanning the wreckage. He could hear the soft panting of Rex beside him, his breath slow but steady, a sign that the fury of the moment had passed. Michael's eyes were fixed on the gang members, who now lay incapacitated, some too injured to move, others too terrified to even try. Rex, having done what was necessary, was once again by his side, his large, amber eyes watching the gang with a quiet, calculated intensity. There was no malice in Rex's gaze, only the cold satisfaction of justice served. But for Michael, it wasn't over. The pain of the past, the memory of the attack on Rex that had nearly taken his partner from him, still burned in his chest. The moment they had been through together was not just an act of revenge. It was something deeper, something that only he and Rex understood. They were no longer just a man and his dog. They were brothers in arms, bound by a shared history of hardship, sacrifice, and loyalty. The soft click of a radio on Michael's belt broke the silence, and he exhaled deeply before answering. Unit 12, this is Michael. We've got the situation under control. Send for backup. His voice was calm, but his heart was still racing. Michael could feel the adrenaline beginning to fade, but it wasn't the endorphins from the fight that lingered in his veins. It was the relief, the bittersweet victory that came with knowing Rex had survived, had fought back, and had done the impossible. He had come back from the brink, from an injury that most thought would be his end. Rex had done what no one expected. As the sirens grew louder in the distance, signaling the arrival of law enforcement, Michael turned to Rex. He bent down, his fingers gently scratching the K9's ears. Rex leaned into the touch, his head tilting slightly as if to acknowledge the bond they shared. There was no need for words. They understood each other perfectly. In this moment, the world could have crumbled around them, and it wouldn't have mattered. They had survived. The arrival of backup marked the beginning of the cleanup process. Officers flooded the warehouse, handcuffing the gang members and securing the area. But it wasn't just the gang that needed tending to. Rex, despite his strength, had been through a hell of his own. His body bore the marks of the fight, the cuts, the bruises, the injuries that would take time to heal. And yet, there he stood, resolute, beside his partner. Michael watched the officers as they started to assess the scene, his mind already on the next step. As the medical team arrived, Michael watched them carefully examine Rex. They moved swiftly, professionally, assessing every inch of the K9's body. Michael stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with a mix of gratitude and frustration. He didn't want anyone to think Rex was weak, but he knew that his partner needed medical attention. Michael, one of the officers, said, her voice filled with compassion. Rex's injuries aren't life-threatening, but he'll need some rest. He's a fighter, no doubt about it. Michael nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. They had made it through, but the road ahead wouldn't be easy for Rex. Still, Michael couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Not many could say they had a partner as loyal, as brave as Rex. As the last of the gang members was escorted out of the warehouse, Michael allowed himself a moment to breathe. He stood in the midst of the wreckage, his eyes scanning the area one last time. This wasn't just a victory for him. This was a victory for the bond they shared. The bond that no one could break. Later that night, after the chaos had been cleared and the gang members had been taken into custody, Michael and Rex returned to the quiet of their home. It was a modest place, far removed from the world of high-speed chases and dangerous criminals. But it was their sanctuary, a place where they could both recover, find solace in each other's company, and rebuild. Michael made sure to prepare Rex's favorite meal, a mix of protein and dog food that Rex devoured hungrily. It was a simple ritual, but it meant everything. As Rex finished eating, Michael sat beside him, resting a hand on his partner's head. He could feel the weight of the day lifting off his shoulders. "You're something else, buddy," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been through hell, and you still came out on top." Rex wagged his tail, his eyes soft content. He wasn't just a dog. He was a survivor, a protector, and Michael's best friend. The night stretched on, and Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing briefly as he took in the peace that had finally settled over them. They were both bruised, both scarred, but they were together. And in this world, that was all that mattered. In the end, it wasn't just about the revenge they had taken. It was about the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog, a bond forged in the heat of battle, strengthened by loyalty, and unshakable in the face of adversity. Rex had proven that nothing could tear them apart, not even the darkest of enemies. As the quiet night wrapped around them, Michael whispered once more, "We're not done yet, Rex. Not by a long shot." And with that, they both drifted into a peaceful sleep, knowing that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting soft shadows over the room. But Michael's thoughts were far from peaceful. The gang was locked up, the threat was neutralized, but one question still gnawed at him. Who else was out there waiting to strike? The police had their leads, but Michael knew better. This wasn't over. The gang might have been taken down, but the ones pulling the strings, the ones who orchestrated the violence, they were still out there. And he had no doubt they would come for Rex. They would come for revenge. As he glanced at Rex, who lay peacefully on the couch, Michael's mind raced. What if the gang's attack was just a test, a warning? What if this wasn't the end of the battle, but just the beginning of something darker? A sudden knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, jolting him back to the present. Michael's heart skipped a beat, his instincts instantly on high alert. He moved toward the door, his hand brushing against the grip of his weapon. Rex's ears perked up, sensing the shift in the air. Michael opened the door, only to find nothing, just a small envelope on the ground. He bent down and picked it up. The note inside read, "You've only seen the beginning. We're coming for him." As Michael read the chilling words, Rex growled low, as if understanding the message. The gang had just begun, and this time, they wouldn't just be going after Michael. They'd be going after everything he held dear. What happens next? Will Michael and Rex survive the storm that's coming their way? Hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what happens next.